Welcome to Pages to Dialogues, your premier destination for insightful discussions on Christian books. Join me as we delve into the pages of thought-provoking Christian literature and explore the timeless truths and principles that can transform our lives. From classic devotionals to contemporary bestsellers, we'll engage in meaningful dialogues that will inspire, encourage, and challenge you to grow deeper in your faith. So, subscribe to Pages to Dialogues now and join the conversation. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can stay updated on new episodes and exclusive content. Let's turn pages into conversations that matter.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time we're really digging into something fascinating.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting.
We're taking a deep dive into the story of Saddleback Church. You know how they went from a small Bible study to a megachurch? It's pretty amazing.
It is.
And the real meat of our source material is Rick Warren's book, The Purpose-Driven Church.
A classic, pretty much a must-read if you want to, build a church that's purpose-driven.
Exactly. And it's had a huge impact.
Millions of copies sold. Shaped how we think about doing church in the modern era.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Yeah.
But we're not just going to take Warren's word for it.
Right. We want to give you the full picture.
We'll also be looking at some critiques of the whole seeker-sensitive approach, give you a more balanced perspective on the whole thing.
Absolutely.
So we're not here to tell you what to think or which church model is the right one.
Not at all.
More like we're going on a journey together to understand how Saddleback grew so much.
And figuring out what principles they used.
And do those principles work outside of Saddleback?
Yeah, can we take these ideas and apply them somewhere else? That's the question.
Totally. So where do we even begin with a story like this?
Well, I think it makes sense to start at the beginning.
Okay, so back to the very start of Saddleback.
Okay, so Rick Warren felt a call to ministry early on. And this is really interesting. He actually got a prayer from W.A. Criswell.
The legendary pastor.
The one and only.
Wow.
And Criswell actually predicted that Warren's future church would be twice the size of First Baptist Dallas.
Wow, that's a bold prediction. Talk about setting the bar high.
Right.
But then Warren doesn't end up in a big city like Dallas. He ends up in Southern California.
Yeah. What's up with that?
Why Southern California? They already had a ton of churches, right?
They did.
So what was the draw?
Okay, so it wasn't like Warren had Southern California on his mind from the start. He was really open to going wherever God led him. He even wrote letters asking about different areas, just exploring his options. And here's where it gets really interesting. He gets a letter from Herman Wooten.
And who's he?
He was the Southern Baptist Director of Missions for Orange County. And Wooten specifically tells Warren to check out the Saddleback Valley.
So he was like, hey, you should go there.
Exactly.
Wow. Almost sounds like it was meant to be, like divine intervention. But didn't Southern California already have a ton of churches?
Tons.
Some of them led by some pretty big-name pastors, right?
Yeah, there were definitely some heavy hitters in the area.
So why start a church there? Was Warren trying to compete?
No, not at all. From day one, Warren was super intentional about focusing on people who weren't already going to church.
You mean the unchurched?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was Saddleback's thing right from the get-go. They weren't trying to steal members from other churches. They were going after a whole new audience.
So it's that classic distinction between being purpose-driven and attendance-driven.
Yeah, you hear it all the time.
People say megachurches are all about the numbers.
Right, just trying to get as many people through the doors as possible.
But you're saying that wasn't Warren's main goal.
Not at all. He knew the danger of focusing just on attendance.
Like you can get people to show up, but if they don't stick around?
What's the point, right?
And Warren was all about assimilating new members.
Integrating them into the life of the church, making them feel like they belonged.
Not just attracting them.
Right, it's about the long game.
Building community.
Making disciples.
So it's not just about getting people in the door. It's about what happens once they're there.
100%.
Do they connect with others?
Do they grow in their faith? Those are the real questions.
That makes a lot of sense. But how do you do that? How do you create a church that's actually purpose-driven and not just chasing numbers?
Well, Warren lays out a pretty clear framework in the book.
Okay, I'm ready. Spill the beans. What are the secrets?
No secrets, really. Just good old-fashioned principles. He argues that any healthy church, no matter how big or small it is, shares certain core values and practices.
Okay, so it's not about size. It's about something deeper.
Yeah. He even compares it to sharpening an axe. He says dedication alone isn't enough. You need the skill to actually use the acts effectively. So the size of the church might change, but the underlying principles of growth and discipleship, those stay the same.
Oh, I like that analogy. Sharpens the point, so to speak.
Exactly.
It's a great reminder that it's not just about good intentions. It's about strategy. It's about being intentional.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about those core principles. What does it actually mean to be purpose-driven? What does it look like in practice?
All right, so the purpose-driven church really boils down to 5 key purposes.
Lay them on me.
Worship, fellowship, discipleship, ministry, and evangelism.
Okay, that covers a lot of ground. But how do you sum all that up in a way that people can actually grasp?
Well, Saddleback did a really good job of boiling it down to a single, powerful purpose statement.
Hit me with it.
All right, are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Here it is. To bring people to Jesus and membership in his family, develop them to Christ-like maturity, and equip them for their ministry in the church and life mission in the world in order to magnify God's name.
Whoa. Okay, that's a mouthful. But it is pretty comprehensive.
It is.
It's got everything in there: personal conversion, global impact.
The whole shebang.
But how do you actually put those ideals into practice, especially when you're trying to reach people who have zero experience with church?
That's the million-dollar question.
And Warren's got an answer.
He does. He calls it thinking like a fish.
Thinking like a fish. Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's all about understanding the needs and preferences of those who are outside the church walls.
People who aren't necessarily against faith.
Right. They just haven't found a church that connects with them.
So it's about bridging that gap between the church and the unchurched.
Exactly. Speaking their language, addressing their felt needs.
Meeting them where they are.
You got it.
But how do you figure out what those needs even are? Did Warren, send out surveys or something?
He actually did. He conducted a community survey.
No way.
Yeah, and the results were pretty surprising. You know what the top reasons were for people not going to church?
What were they? I'm dying to know.
It wasn't theological disagreements, it was practical stuff.
Like what?
Not knowing anyone at the church, finding the services boring or irrelevant, or just feeling like church wasn't a place for them. Feeling like they didn't belong.
So it's not about convincing people about specific doctrines.
Not so much.
It's more about creating a welcoming environment.
An environment where people feel comfortable, where they can explore faith without feeling pressured.
Where they feel like they can be themselves.
Exactly.
So it's about being relevant. It's about being engaging. It's about addressing people's real-life concerns.
That's the heart of it. And that brings us to a really interesting concept, worship as a witness.
Hold on. How can worship be a witness to people who don't even believe?
Well, Warren believes that when God's presence is really felt in the service and the message is clear, even people who are brand new to Christianity can experience something powerful.
Like they can sense something is different.
Right. Even if they don't fully understand it.
That reminds me of the story of Pentecost. You know, when the Holy Spirit showed up so powerfully that it drew a huge crowd?
Exactly.
Ah.
And tons of people ended up getting saved.
So it wasn't just the preaching. It was the presence of God that drew people in.
And that leads us to the idea of a seeker service.
Okay. What's a seeker service?
It's a service that's specifically designed to be welcoming to people who are exploring faith, people who are checking things out for the first time.
So are we talking about dimming the lights and bringing in a rock band?
It's a little more nuanced than that.
Okay, good, because I'm not sure I'm ready for a mosh pit at church.
Warren emphasizes practical things, like having friendly greeters, avoiding insider language or church jargon, getting rid of announcements that wouldn't make sense to a newcomer.
Making it easy for people to understand what's going on.
Exactly. The whole point is to remove any unnecessary barriers and create a safe space for people to explore.
So it's really about being intentional with every aspect of the service.
From the moment people walk in the door.
To the moment they leave.
Yeah, you got to think about everything from their perspective.
From the perspective of someone who's never been to church before.
Pretend you're walking in their shoes. What would make them feel welcome? What would make them want to come back?
Makes sense. And I bet music plays a big role in that.
Huge role. And this is another area where Warren challenges some traditional assumptions.
Okay, music. Always a hot topic in church circles. Does Warren have a specific style he advocates for?
Well, he actually pushes back against the idea that one style of music is inherently more sacred than another.
Because that's a debate that never ends, right?
Oh, I know it.
Traditional versus contemporary. Hymns versus worship songs.
The battle rages on.
But Warren's saying it's not about the style.
He points out that church music has always been evolving. It's always adapted to different cultures and contexts. He even tells this funny story about how hymn singing used to be considered worldly in Baptist churches.
Wait, what? Hymns were too worldly.
I know, right? It's crazy to think about now. But back then, it was a big deal. And get this, it took one pastor 20 years to convince his congregation to start singing hymns.
20 years to get them to sing hymns. That's unbelievable.
I know, right? Talk about resistance to change.
Makes you wonder what those old-timers would think about the music we sing in church today.
Right. I mean, they'd probably have a heart attack. But the takeaway here is that musical preferences are fluid. What sounds reverent to one person might sound totally off-putting to someone else. So instead of getting bogged down in debates about style, churches should focus on choosing music that's engaging.
Music that connects with their target audience.
Music that points people towards God.
Music that makes people feel something.
Exactly. But choosing the right music is just one piece of the puzzle.
Right. There's a whole lot more to it than that.
You got to think about the message too, the sermon. How do you craft a message that actually resonates with people who might have never even opened a Bible before?
Yeah, that's a tough one. How do you make the Bible relevant to someone who's never even heard of it?
It's a challenge for sure. Well, Warren's got some ideas. He suggests a shift in focus. Instead of preaching mainly to Christians, he says, you got to tailor your messages for seekers.
Okay, so you're speaking their language literally.
Yeah, and he found that using what he calls felt need sermon titles was super effective.
Felt need sermon titles.
Like the kind of titles you'd see on self-help books.
Oh, I get it. So like how to overcome anxiety or finding your purpose, those kinds of things.
Exactly. Stuff that grabs your attention because it speaks to your deepest longings and fears.
It's true. Those titles just draw you in. They make you want to know more.
Right. And Warren even tells this story about a man who was struggling with anger.
Oh, wow.
And he found a discarded sermon outline just lying around somewhere.
Okay.
And the topic was anger management. And just reading that outline sparked something in him.
Wow.
And it eventually led him to start exploring faith.
That's amazing. Just a simple sermon outline had that much impact.
It's wild.
It really shows you the power of making the message relevant, making it accessible. It's not just about being theologically deep, you know?
Right.
It's about meeting people where they are,
Yeah.
speaking to their real life struggles.
100%. And all of these elements we've talked about, the welcoming atmosphere, the engaging music, the relatable message, they all point to a core belief in the power of changed lives.
Makes sense. I mean, seeing a real life example of transformation is way more compelling than any sermon or program could ever be.
Right. Actions speak louder than words. And Warren argues that changed lives are the most convincing evidence of the gospel's power.
Yeah, I could see that.
He shares all these stories from Saddleback's early days about people whose lives were totally turned around.
People who found hope and healing.
Exactly. And it created what he calls a parade of satisfied customers.
Oh, I like that.
People saw the genuine impact, and it made them curious. It made them want what those people had.
It's like word of mouth marketing, but for faith.
Exactly. But let's not forget, Saddleback wasn't always a megachurch. They started small. They faced challenges. They had to be creative.
They had to hustle.
They did. So did their early struggles ever get in the way of their growth?
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Interestingly, no. They had limited facilities. They were constantly changing locations. But those obstacles didn't seem to hold them back.
Because the focus was on making a difference in people's lives.
Exactly. It wasn't about the building. It was about the people.
It's a good reminder that authenticity and genuine transformation, that stuff resonates no matter what.
No matter the circumstances.
So let's say you've got a growing crowd. People are experiencing the love of Christ. Lives are being changed. How do you turn that into committed church membership?
That's where the membership class comes in.
Okay, so more than just signing a form and getting a welcome packet.
Way more. A good membership class should clearly lay out the church's vision, values, and expectations.
It's like, this is who we are, this is what we believe, this is what we're about.
Right. It's about helping new believers understand what it means to be a part of this specific community.
So it's about setting expectations, making sure people know what they're signing up for.
Exactly. And Warren makes an interesting point here. He talks about the longing for belonging that so many people feel in our modern world.
People crave connection.
Yeah, they want purpose. They want a sense of family.
And the church can provide that.
In a way that nothing else can.
Absolutely. So how do you foster that sense of belonging? How do you move people from the crowd to the congregation?
Well, Warren suggests small groups and home-based fellowship. That's where those deeper relationships are formed.
It's about creating a space where people feel known, loved, and supported.
Not just faces in a crowd.
So you've got people connected, they're growing, but how do you help them mature in their faith? Becoming a Christian is just the beginning, right?
Exactly. There's a whole journey ahead. And Warren introduces this concept called the life development process.
Okay, I'm listening.
And he uses a baseball diamond analogy to illustrate the different stages of spiritual growth.
I love a good analogy. So walk me through these bases. What are the milestones?
All right, so first base is belonging, committing to membership. Second base is growing, developing spiritual habits, deepening your understanding. Third base is serving, discovering your gifts, and finding a place to use them. And finally, home plate is sharing your faith both locally and globally.
Wow, that's a great picture of the Christian journey. It's progressive, it's intentional, it's about moving forward.
Right. And Saddleback actually uses 4 specific membership classes to guide people through this process.
Oh, wow. So they've really systematized it.
They have. So Class 101 is called Discovering Saddleback Membership.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And it covers the basics of faith and belonging.
So it's like the introductory course.
Exactly. Then there's Class 201, Discovering Spiritual Maturity.
So that's where you go deeper.
Yeah, it delves into spiritual habits and deepening your relationship with God. So that covers the first 2 bases.
Okay. What about Class 301?
That one's called Discovering My Ministry. And it focuses on identifying your spiritual gifts, exploring different ministry opportunities, and finding where you can best serve the church.
So that's where you transition from being a spectator to an active participant. You're putting your faith into action.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then finally, there's Class 401, Discovering My Mission.
Okay, the final stage.
This one equips members to share their faith and participate in outreach.
So it's a pretty comprehensive system.
It is, but it all hinges on the belief that every member is a minister. That's a core principle in Warren's model.
Right. It's not just about the pastor or the paid staff.
It's about every believer stepping up and using their gifts.
Every member has a role to play.
That's the idea. But how do you help people figure out what their gifts even are?
Especially in a large church.
Right. You could have tons of talented people just blending in.
Like hidden treasures.
Warren actually talks about how he stumbled upon some incredible people with amazing skills and experience who were just hiding in plain sight.
It's like finding a world-renowned chef serving coffee in the church kitchen.
Or a Grammy-winning musician leading the children's choir.
Exactly. So how do you unlock that potential? How do you identify and utilize all those gifts?
Well, Warren realized the need for intentional systems. Things like ministry fairs, highlighting different ministries in sermons and newsletters, creating clear pathways for people to step into leadership roles.
So it's about making it easy for people to get involved.
And to find their place.
But let's be real, building a thriving lay ministry is hard work, especially as a church grows larger. How do you effectively empower and equip all those lay leaders?
It's a big challenge. And Warren actually shares a story about feeling burned out in the early years of Saddleback. He was trying to do everything himself.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's easy to get overwhelmed when you're trying to wear all the hats.
So he made a deal with the congregation.
A deal? What kind of deal?
He asked them to take ownership of the ministry while he focused on equipping and training them.
So he was like, I'll train you, but you're the ones doing the work.
Pretty much. It was a bold move, but it paid off big time. Saddleback's growth exploded after that shift.
Because it freed Warren up to focus on the bigger picture.
Exactly. He could focus on vision casting, teaching, leadership development.
While the congregation took ownership of the day-to-day ministry.
It was a win-win.
But how do you train lay leaders effectively, especially when they may not have any prior experience or formal training?
That's a great question. And Saddleback actually developed a program called SALT.
SALT. What's that stand for?
Saddleback Advanced Leadership Training.
Okay, I like it. Catchy.
It offers monthly rallies for lay leaders.
So it's like a pep rally for church volunteers.
Kind of. But it's more than just rah-rah. They focus on vision casting, skill building, encouragement, practical training.
So it's about providing ongoing support and resources for those who are stepping into leadership roles.
Exactly. It's about empowering them to succeed. But with all this focus on structure system strategies, is there a danger of losing sight of the bigger picture?
Yeah, that's a good point. What's the point of all this if you forget why you're doing it in the first place?
Right. And that leads us to the final and perhaps most important point, God's purpose for the church.
Okay, so let's zoom out. Let's talk about the big picture. At the end of the day, it's not about numbers or programs or even strategy.
It's about being faithful to God's calling. It's about aligning with his plan.
So what does that look like in practice? How do you know if you're on the right track?
Well, Warren uses this analogy of gardening. He says you can't force a plant to grow, but you can create the right conditions, provide the necessary nutrients, and trust God to do the rest.
So focus on being faithful, fulfill your purpose, and let God handle the growth. That's a powerful image. But didn't Warren also face some criticism for this approach?
Yeah, some people felt like the seeker-sensitive model was, catering too much to the unchurched.
Like watering down the gospel message.
Right, like are you compromising the truth to make it more palatable?
So how do you find that balance?
That's the million-dollar question.
How do you stay true to the gospel?
And still be relevant.
And still be welcoming?
It's a tough one, and there's definitely a tension there. Some critics argue that when you tailor everything to the unchurched, you risk creating a shallow faith.
Like it's more about feeling good than wrestling with the hard stuff.
Yeah, and about following a set of rules instead of having a real relationship with God.
And that makes me think about those membership classes we talked about.
Yeah.
On the one hand, they provide structure.
They give people a pathway.
But could they also lead to a checklist mentality?
It's possible. Like you're just checking boxes instead of experiencing real transformation.
So it's something to be aware of.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Every church needs to think about these things. Pray about them.
There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Nope. The key is to be intentional, to be discerning, and to always be rooted in Scripture.
The Bible has to be our foundation.
Absolutely. So while the purpose-driven model has a lot of good stuff in it,
It's not a magic bullet.
it's not a guarantee for church growth.
It's a tool, one of many tools.
Right. And the real challenge is finding that balance, being seeker-sensitive, but also deeply rooted in biblical truth.
So it's not either. It's both hand.
Yeah. And ultimately, it's about being faithful to God's calling,
Seeking his guidance.
trusting his plan.
And remembering that each church is unique.
Every context is different.
What works in one place might not work in another.
Exactly. One thing that's really struck me throughout this deep dive is just the scale of Saddleback's impact.
Yeah, they've had a massive influence.
From a tiny Bible study to a global ministry, millions of lives touched.
It's pretty incredible. And their journey has had its ups and downs.
It has.
But it's full of valuable lessons.
For anyone who wants to build a church, that makes a difference.
And even beyond a church context, I think there's a lot we can learn from Saddleback.
Oh, absolutely.
The emphasis on purpose.
Intentionality.
Understanding your audience.
These are principles that apply to all areas of life.
Whether you're leading a team at work, starting a nonprofit, or just trying to live a more purposeful life.
Yeah, the purpose-driven mindset is powerful stuff.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the purpose-driven church, I want to leave you with one final question to ponder. What surprised you most about Saddleback's story? And what's one idea or strategy you're going to take away from this and apply to your own life?
Great question. And we hope you'll continue to explore these concepts, wrestle with the questions, seek God's heart for your own unique contribution to his kingdom.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pages to Dialogues. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and found valuable insights to apply to your life. If you did, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, Pages to Dialogues, for more thought-provoking dialogues on Christian books. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback on this episode. Please leave a comment below and let's continue the conversation. If you know someone who would benefit from our discussions, please share this episode with them. Your support means the world to us. Finally, if you appreciated this episode, please give us a thumbs up and a like. It helps us reach more people and continue creating content that inspires and uplifts. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to engaging with you on our next episode of Pages to Dialogues.